Stephanie Diller, the widow of Officer Jonathan Diller, the New York City police officer who was killed in the line of duty during a traffic stop. Of course, Trump went to the funeral last week. And Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, tried to, and she was asked to leave, although she says she wasn't, but there's video that suggests she was. And the statement was made generally that unless you were specifically invited, like Trump, they didn't want politicians, particularly the local ones, including the mayor, to attend the wake or the funeral service. Gee, I wonder why. Well, Stephanie Diller's eulogy helps to explain why.
It's hard to imagine how long I have to wait to see Jonathan again. When the doors to heaven open for me one day, I hope to see Jonathan standing there looking at me just like he did on our wedding day. My husband died a hero, but he also lived as one. Our world will never be the same, but I know I speak for everyone when I say I could not be more proud of him. It's been 2 years and 2 months since Detective Rivera and Detective Mora made the ultimate sacrifice, just like my husband, Jonathan Diller. Dominique Rivera stood in front of all the elected officials present today pleading for change. That change never came, and now my son will grow up without his father. I will grow old without my husband, and his parents have to say goodbye to their child. How many more police officers and how many more families need to make the ultimate sacrifice before we start protecting them? I don't wish this kind of pain on anyone. Jonathan lived his life doing good for people, and it's now time for people to do good for all the officers he represents.
Yeah. The data, first quarter of 2024, unarmed black men killed by cops, nationally, 0. Police officers killed while on duty, just the first quarter of 2024. 29. Is that what people think is happening? It's what you're saying. What cops are not roaming the streets looking for unarmed black men to shoot and kill? It's never been the case. I mean, and again, the statistical work of Harvard professor Roland Fryer and others, the study that we talked about a few weeks ago by the 2 Stetson University professors. There's just no evidence to support the claims made by the left that serve as the basis for their decarceration, deprosecution strategies.
Well, but Governor Hochul was on with Al Sharpton, and essentially said, look, we're working really hard to bring down crime. We're making progress here, and we're doing good things, and there's nothing to see here, essentially.
You should, yeah. I mean, Kathy Hochul takes refuge with Al Sharpton. I mean, it almost doesn't matter what she says after that statement, right? Of course she did. And Al Sharpton is there to serve, to sing for his supper on MSNBC, just like the gaggle on Morning Joe, and provide a platform for the kind of response. So this is Kathy Hochul's response, as Jeannie was characterizing, essentially to what Stephanie Diller had to say.
Brothers, sisters, everyone is just so distraught. And yes, there's a lot of anger. Understandably, there's anger about how these individuals who commit crimes over and over are back out on the streets again. So that's one of the reasons we worked hard with the legislature last year to change the bail laws so the judges have more discretion. And, there's a lot of complicated factors here, but I totally understand the outrage of the family. I do, and we're working hard to keep crime down.
I feel your pain. I work for Clinton. Let's keep it going. Locally, the Cook County State's Attorney's race we were talking about, that was won by Eileen O'Neill, O'Malley, O'Shea, Madigan, O'Connor, Walsh, Boyle, Kelly, Byrne, Cullerton, Burke. Here's what she said on election night, just to remind you. We want less crime and safer communities, not by locking everybody up, but by turning people around.
Well,
that's your presumptive incoming Cook County State's Attorney. No, of course we're going to turn people around. What the Cook County justice system is good at? Character building.
Well, look, those migrants, they just want to come and be baseball players, those Venezuelan migrants. I mean, they did the soft report in Chicago Tribune about the 16-year-old who's just finds his solace on the baseball field now that he's here. He's been here for over a year illegally. But, he's just going to be the next Venezuelan professional ball player here.
You know how the Cook County jail is just full of single moms who had to steal diapers for their babies? Chicago woman faces felony charges for allegedly smuggling narcotics into a Cook County jail inside a 9-month-old baby's diaper. That's who you're actually dealing with. These fictional people that are described by Kathy Hochul, by your incoming state's attorney, presumptive incoming state's attorney, Burke, and Brandon Johnson, and Lori Lightfoot, and Kim Fox, and J.B. Pritzker, and on and on and on. The fictional people they talk about, the fictional profile. And then there's the reality. But I understand two things. One, I'm not in Chicago anymore, so I'm not allowed to talk about it. And nobody else is either who's not in Chicago. And the reason is because the one thing that Chicagoans can cling to, and Cook County residents and Chicago metropolitan residents, is their self-delusion. Please don't pierce the delusions I use to get through the day and convince myself that I'm a good person. Okay, I won't. I'm happy to spit in the wind. They pay me either way. For more on all of this, we're pleased to be joined by our old colleague Steve Cortes, who writes at stevecortes.substack. He's also the president of the League of American Workers, a populist right pro-laborer advocacy group. Steve, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan. Good morning, Jeannie. Appreciate you having me.
You're not allowed to talk about Chicago either, so I don't know what we're going to talk about because you're not there anymore. But let's break from orthodoxy and do it anyway for fun.
Okay.
So yes, this the combination of the indigenous repeat violent offenders and then those violent offenders that we're importing in Chicago, just as we're seeing in New York and Denver and all sorts of other big cities and not so big cities, and the idea that. In particular, with the news over the weekend that there's a victor on the Dem side in the Cook County State's Attorney's race, that represents the possibility of change.
Right. Dan, unfortunately not, and those are for both reasons national out of Washington, D.C., as well as local there in Chicago and at the Cook County level. By the way, speaking of leaving Chicago, when I heard the weather report before you came on that there's going to be snow this week, I'm glad on that aspect that I live in Tennessee in the American South now. But kidding aside, and much more importantly, the main reason I left and moved my family out of the city of Chicago, where I raised them for 25 years, is crime, is that the supposedly good neighborhood of Chicago became incredibly dangerous, and that trend only accelerates. And that's why I wrote this new article about radical politicians, particularly Chicago, who are literally trying to smash civil society in the United States. And I think even a lot of Chicagoans don't know the full details of this story because, of course, corporate media hates these facts because it doesn't fit the narrative that an illegal migrant housed at taxpayer expense in a luxury building in Chicago, the former Standard Club of Chicago, a man named Elvis Hernandez Pernalete, an illegal migrant from Venezuela, who was previously arrested in Chicago. So not only did he commit the illegal act of trespassing into the United States across Biden's open border, then committed an additional crime in Chicago, shoplifting at a TJ Maxx downtown. Instead of being turned over to ICE for immediate deportation, which any sane jurisdiction would do, he was released to go back to his luxury building where he lived, and he then committed a horrific act of violence against a woman in Chicago on the UIC campus. So just over 2 weeks ago, on Saturday, March 16th, 8 p.m. at night, a woman got off the L at the UIC stop, and on the UIC campus, she was choked unconscious and sexually assaulted. Now, thankfully, he has been arrested, but the reality, Dan, is this is a 100% preventable crime. If he's not allowed in this country in the first place, it never happens. We got a second chance at him when he was arrested for shoplifting in the city of Chicago. If he was turned over to ICE and deported then, this horrific act of violence never happens. It shows you the priorities, though, of the Chicago authorities and the Washington, D.C. authorities, primarily, of course, President Biden, in terms of prioritizing illegal migrants over the safety and security of the citizens of this country, including this woman who had to endure a horrific, violent trauma because of policy failures.
Well, I've got some good news for you. Alderman Daniel Espada is on the job, and he has scheduled a subject matter hearing for April 11th. He's taking immediate action to discuss a potential push to lower the citywide speed limit from 30 miles an hour to 25 miles an hour.
Yeah, that should solve things. And by the way, speaking of that same kind of lunacy and inattention, just dereliction of duty regarding what city leaders should be talking about and should be focused on here when an act of horrific violence like this unfolds. And this is what I wrote about in the article, because the juxtaposition here, the contrast to me was very startling. In the Chicago City Wire, which is a fantastic platform, they ran a very funny headline about a not funny policy proposal. The headline was "Hookers and Chicken Parm," because city leaders are gathering in a couple of weeks at the City Club of Chicago, which was once a pretty prestigious institution that holds policy-based luncheons at Maggiano's, hence the headline, "Hookers and Chicken Parm." Great restaurant, but not a very great topic to be talking about. So that
is a good restaurant name. Yeah.
Yeah, the panel, which includes state senator from Chicago, Celia Villanueva, who represents the Little Village area not far from where this UIC tragedy happened. They're going to be discussing decriminalizing prostitution. As if that will do wonders for Chicago. Let's make sex for hire legal to add to all of the problems and chaos of Chicago streets. So instead of addressing, hey, we have dangerous illegal aliens who are hiding in plain sight in the city of Chicago. They are committing documented horrific acts of violence against Chicago residents, against this poor woman who was doing nothing but minding her own business. Instead of trying to address these issues, instead of trying to protect Chicagoans, folks like this state senator and others are focused on, hey, why don't we go even further down a Marxist radical agenda? Let's decriminalize prostitution, because that is really going to help the situation on the ground in Chicago.
Well, the advanced billing, we talked about this last week, and I think that is the best forum at Maggiano's where it's family style. But I think the billing of this was, to make sure we protect people's individual dignity. And again, I mean, when I think of individual dignity, I think of pimps. Protecting the and the state can be the pimp in this situation, or certainly take a cut of it. They can. I think what the working title we have is
Gimme Dat.
Gimme Dat Hose. Brought to you by Brandon Johnson and J.B. Prisker. So there a couple of pimps here. Maybe they can start dressing up like Don the Magic Wand. I think that would be a good look for Jelly Belly. Anyway, individual dignity. I mean, that's the thing. That's the calling card of the Chicago political ruling class. And you just see it everywhere with drug legalization and the marijuana dispensaries, the prospect of finally showing professional sex workers the respect they deserve, because there's no human trafficking and sex trafficking that goes on either, just like it doesn't happen with international cartels and gangs that do the same thing across our southern border, and increasingly apparently across our northern border too. That's a bit porous. Just the whole thing is this is Candide. Chicago's Candide. This is the best of all possible worlds, and I don't want to hear anything different.
Well, the reality, unfortunately, Dan, and I think Chicagoans know this all too well, and suburbanites know this, by the way, who don't want to go into the city anymore for understandable reasons.
Well, they don't need to go into the city for the prostitutes because they have those key parties in Naperville.
Well, right, but putting that aside, Chicago is unfortunately, it's becoming Potterville. I mean, it really is. Now listen, it was never Bedford Falls. I mean, it's a big city and it's got big city issues. That's for sure. But it has gotten so bad lately. And you're exactly right. Look, casinos downtown, legalized pot, possibly now legalized prostitution, out of control, violent chaos, including from illegal migrants who don't belong there in the first place, who, again, I want to point out for folks who may not be aware of the Standard Club, too, if they didn't work right down.
Oh, yeah.
The Standard Club, formerly, until the lockdowns, which ruined that club, ruined a lot of businesses and institutions, until that, this was one of the most elite private clubs in Chicago. It was described by the Chicago Sun-Times as a, quote, mecca for Chicago business titans. It had a primarily Jewish membership, a very swanky place. I put a picture in my article so that folks can see what kind of a place this is. which then grew to become, unfortunately, a housing dormitory for illegal migrants, at one point housing over 1,000 of them. And as of a couple of weeks ago, before he was finally, really arrested, housing Elvis Hernandez Pernalete, the accused rapist who was arrested for this horrific crime at the University of Illinois at Chicago. So think of that, by the way, that these illegal migrants, not only are they dangerous, not only are they unvetted, but they are living in conditions that are far better than many American citizens live in the city of Chicago. That's the reality, and that's what we're paying for them to live in conditions that are better than many Chicagoans enjoy, and on top of it, letting them roam free throughout the city, even after getting arrested for a second criminal act in the United States. So, to me, I hope this outrage infuriates Chicagoans, because it should. It should infuriate every American, by the way. And here's why I also wrote this article. I don't live in Chicago anymore. I care deeply about Chicago, of course, because it's always going to be my home, and I have so many family members and friends there. But even more than that, I think, and I try to convince all Americans, they should care about Chicago, because I think it is the literal and metaphorical heart of America. And when the heart of America is sick like this, Chicago, it is sure to have grave effects for the rest of the body, for the rest of the country. I really believe that. And I'm trying to warn the rest of America, too, that Chicago is the canary in the coal mine that is warning you of where Biden and his ilk will take the entire country. They will turn the nation into Chicago if we're not aware of what's happening there, and if we don't repel this kind of policy lunacy. Because, again, this isn't just, bad luck. This wasn't just a crime that we couldn't possibly foresee. These were systemic policy failures that led to this act of just horrendous violence in the city of Chicago at 8 p.m. on a Saturday night. And this has to stop, and it can with national elections this November.
Steve Cortes, former senior advisor to President Trump, president of the League of American Workers, a populist right pro-labor advocacy group. Steve, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks so much.
Andy joined us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like a hot, steaming cup of information to start your day. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Quick delivery service. What do you need delivered today?
Hi, I'm trying to work through a last-minute to-do list for my boss. Can you deliver a hard drive to the Loop in Chicago?
We can deliver that today.
Okay, can you deliver 20 boxes to a client in Rockford?
We can deliver that today.
Can you deliver 12